The bright, artificial suns of the Hollywood studio lamps hummed with a quiet, rhythmic energy, casting a golden glow over the polished stage of the Newlywed Game. It was a day where the air felt thick with the scent of hairspray, nervous excitement, and the sweet, sometimes unpredictable, essence of young love. The audience sat in hushed anticipation, their faces blurred into a sea of expectant smiles, waiting for the magic of television to unfold. This was more than just a game, it was a grand social experiment wrapped in the glittering packaging of entertainment, a place where the foundations of new marriages would be tested by the simple power of a question. At the center of this vibrant universe stood Bob Eubanks, a man whose smile was as seasoned as his career, welcoming the world to another chapter of matrimonial discovery. He stood there, the quintessential host, exuding a warmth that felt like a familiar embrace to the viewers at home. With a flourish of his hand and a voice that resonated with practiced charm, he introduced the protagonists of today's story. There were 4 couples, each at a different stage of their brand new journey together, each carrying their own unique history and the hopeful shimmer of a future yet unwritten. First, there were Vivian and Andy Kendall, a pair whose union was a mere 3 months old, still basking in the radiant afterglow of their wedding day. Following them were Denise and Keith Hyde, 10 months into their journey, a period long enough to find a rhythm but short enough for every day to still feel like a gift. The third couple, Lena and Christian Dangard, had been married for only 2 months, their laughter still echoing with the novelty of shared last names. Finally, Teresa and John Payne rounded out the group, veterans of 23 months, nearly 2 years of navigating the beautiful complexities of life side by side. Bob's voice boomed through the studio, welcoming them all to the stage. The energy was infectious as he announced the departure of the wives to a soundproof sanctuary, leaving the husbands behind to face the first volley of inquiries. The rules were simple yet profound. The men had to predict the thoughts of their beloved partners. Success meant 5 points, failure meant a humorous revelation. As the ladies disappeared behind the heavy, insulated doors, the stage became a sanctuary of brotherhood and slightly anxious bravado. The first question was one that invited both laughter and a touch of bashfulness. Bob leaned in, his eyes twinkling with mischief, and asked the gentlemen to identify which part of their wives' bodies the women themselves would say bounced the most. He offered 3 choices: the top, the middle, or the bottom. John Payne, the most experienced husband on the panel, didn't hesitate. A confident smile played on his lips as he declared that it was definitely the top part, noting with a proud nod that his wife was well proportioned in that area. Christian Dangard followed suit, his voice filled with a gentle adoration as he agreed that his wife certainly bounced upstairs. Keith Hyde and Andy Kendall made it a unanimous decision, all 4 men firmly believing that their wives would identify their upper silhouettes as the primary source of rhythmic movement. As the echoes of their laughter settled, Bob shifted the tone toward the social circles that surrounded these young marriages. He asked them to imagine their wives' friends as light bulbs and to identify which one amongst them was, perhaps, the least luminous, the dimmest bulb in the metaphorical chandelier. Christian was the first to answer, naming a friend named Julia with a wry smile, suggesting that while the lamp might be on, the room was quite empty. Keith pointed toward a friend named Laurie, while Andy chose a woman named Cindy, remarking that the lights were on but nobody was home. John, with a playful look of impending doom, named a friend nicknamed Nutso Allison, hoping his wife wouldn't find his honesty too scandalous. The final question of the opening round touched upon the delicate subject of family and the inevitable passage of time. Bob asked the men to complete a sentence reflecting a hope for the future, that as they grew old together, their wives would not become a certain way, just like their mothers. Keith spoke of stubbornness, describing his mother-in-law as a hard-spoken woman whose strong will was a defining trait. Andy, with a laugh that suggested a deep but chaotic affection, whispered the word crazy, admitting that while he loved the woman, her eccentricities were legendary. John focused on a different pace of life, hoping his wife wouldn't become slow, noting that his mother-in-law had a unique talent for being late to every occasion. Christian closed the round with a more material concern, hoping his wife wouldn't inherit her mother's identity as a shopaholic. The show paused for a moment of commercial reflection, a brief interlude where the world of home improvements and financial security took center stage. There were stories of smiles transformed by modern dental wonders, homes powered by the silent strength of the sun, and the quiet dignity of finding the true value in one's treasured belongings. These were the mundane but essential threads of the American dream, woven into the fabric of the afternoon. When the cameras found their focus once more, the wives had returned, their faces bright with curiosity and the slight tension of the unknown. Bob welcomed them back, the cards containing their husbands' secrets resting firmly on the men's laps. The game was now a dance of synchronization. Vivian Kendall was the first to speak. When asked about the bouncing part of her anatomy, she laughed with a genuine, unpretentious joy, confirming that it was absolutely her top part. She spoke of being blessed in that regard, her husband Andy's prediction matching her reality perfectly. Denise Hyde followed, her runner's physique providing the evidence for her answer. She too chose the top part, noting how things moved during her daily exercise. Lena Dangard shared a humorous insight into her husband's protective nature, choosing the top part and mentioning his preference for less revealing clothing to ward off the wandering eyes of others. Teresa Payne completed the perfect score for the round, admitting that her husband's fondness for her chest made the top part the only logical answer. All four couples moved forward in perfect harmony. The second round brought the light bulbs back into the conversation. Denise Hyde broke the streak of perfect matches by naming a friend named Brianna, describing her with a bluntness that only true friends, or former ones, could possess. Her husband Keith had predicted Laurie, leading to a spirited debate on stage about which friend was truly the most dim-witted. It was a moment of raw, comedic honesty that reminded everyone of the complexities of social circles. Lena Dangard, however, restored the balance by correctly identifying Julia as the friend who wasn't all there, jokingly asking the audience not to send her any angry letters. Teresa Payne also found a match, knowing immediately that John would choose Nutso Allison, the friend whose nickname spoke volumes. Vivian Kendall finished the round by matching with Andy on the name Cindy, citing her occasional lack of consideration as the reason for her choice. The third question, regarding the traits of their mothers, proved to be a minefield of hilarity and slight peril. Lena Dangard's first instinct was the word fat, a bluntness that sent a ripple of shocked laughter through the audience, though she eventually landed on the idea of her mother being strong-willed. However, her husband Christian had predicted shopaholic, leaving them without a match. Teresa Payne chose the word overweight, missing the mark of her husband John's prediction of being slow. Vivian Kendall found success, laughing as she admitted her mother was indeed crazy, just as Andy had predicted. She noted that despite the eccentricity, her husband and mother actually got along quite well, perhaps, she mused, because they shared a certain wild spirit. Denise Hyde rounded out the segment by choosing the words overwhelmed and busy, failing to match Keith's prediction of stubbornness. The stage became a whirlwind of playful bickering and defense, as husbands and wives navigated the delicate art of describing their extended families. Another interlude followed, filled with messages of health, security, and the simple joys of a well-organized home. It was a reminder of the world outside the studio, a world where people sought to protect their identities and find a bit of financial breathing room in a busy world. The game entered its second half with renewed intensity, the point values doubling as the stakes grew higher. The wives were now the ones in the hot seat, tasked with predicting the responses of their husbands who were sequestered offstage. Bob asked the ladies to reflect on the very beginning of their physical intimacy. He gave them 3 options to describe their husband's initial efforts: all thumbs, all talk, or all over the place. Lena Dangard chose all over the place, her story involving a Super Bowl Sunday, a recent breakup, and a celebration that perhaps went a little too far. Denise Hyde chose all talk, explaining that they had waited a long time and Keith had spent much of the night seeking constant reassurance. Vivian Kendall opted for all thumbs, attributing his fumbling to a natural and rather endearing case of nerves. Teresa Payne also chose all over the place, noting that since she had made John wait an entire year until their wedding night, his excitement had been uncontrollable. The next inquiry sought to find the source of past frustrations, asking the wives to name a place where they had a miserable time and it was entirely their husband's fault. Denise pointed to a recent trip to a department store called Mervyn's. Vivian recalled a disastrous dinner at a seafood restaurant where the food was beyond repair. Lena chose a deeply personal moment, their own wedding party, explaining that the responsibilities of caring for their 18-month-old daughter had prevented her from enjoying the celebration. The final 10-point question focused on the future of their household dynamics. Bob asked what specific item the wives might one day tell their husbands to take and put elsewhere. Vivian chose his ubiquitous collection of baseball hats. Teresa pointed to his staggering collection of 50 pairs of shoes. Lena, with a mischievous glint in her eye, chose his mother. Denise joined Vivian in the crusade against the baseball hats, noting that they were a constant fixture of her husband's wardrobe. The round concluded with a bonus question about the architecture of their homes, specifically which room contained the most windows. It was a question of observation and shared space. All four women, Teresa, Lena, Denise, and Vivian, confidently chose the living room as the most luminous part of their dwellings. As the men returned to the stage for the final comparison, the atmosphere was electric. The points were tallied, and the dream of a second honeymoon in Hawaii hung in the balance. In the intimacy round, Keith and Denise failed to match, as Keith predicted all over the place while Denise had remembered all talk. Christian and Lena found harmony with all over the place, as did John and Teresa. Andy Kendall, however, disagreed with his wife Vivian. He claimed to be all over the place, while she insisted he was all thumbs and riddled with nerves. The question of the lousy locations brought more revelations. Christian missed the mark with a story about bowling, while Lena stood firm on the wedding party. John Payne lost his way in Baja, California, while Teresa remembered the seafood restaurant. Andy Kendall, however, found redemption, matching Vivian's memory of the disastrous seafood dinner. Keith Hyde also missed, recalling a trip to Laughlin while Denise remained focused on the argument at the department store. The final regular question about the husband's belongings saw a series of misses. John thought of the Dallas Cowboys, missing Teresa's shoes. Andy thought of sports in general, missing the specific target of his baseball hats. Keith guessed shoes, but Denise was focused on his hats. Christian guessed his new car, unaware that Lena was ready to send his mother packing. Finally, the bonus question arrived. The prize was a romantic escape to the Kona Surf Resort in Hawaii, a paradise of golf, tennis, and saltwater pools. The tension was palpable. Keith Hyde correctly identified the family or living room, bringing his total to 30 points. Christian Dangard followed with the living room, reaching 45 points. John Payne also chose the living room, tying the score at 45. It all came down to Andy and Vivian Kendall. Andy took a deep breath. He looked at the stage, at the host, and then at the woman he had married just 3 months ago. He said the words, living room. The studio erupted in cheers. With 50 points, Andy and Vivian Kendall were the grand prize winners. There were hugs, laughter, and the joyous realization that their young marriage was off to a winning start. Bob Eubanks signed off with his signature grace, leaving the couples to celebrate their newfound insights. The lights dimmed, the cameras stopped rolling, but the stories of these 8 individuals continued, enriched by a day of honesty, laughter, and the enduring, beautiful game of being newlyweds. It was a day where love was the ultimate prize, and the journey was only just beginning.